Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I shall never forget the day on which the lace parasol first came into our lives. It was a languid summer afternoon at Styles Court, though, as you shall discover, it was hardly the sort of country house affair one associates with restful garden parties. But I get ahead of myself. Permit me to set the scene. We had arrived early that July morning, the little train rattling through verdant Essex fields, carrying Monsieur Poirot and me toward our latest diversion. My good friend, ever the connoisseur of his own repose, had been persuaded, rather reluctantly, to accept an invitation from Lady Marjorie Winthrop to judge her annual garden fete. Styles Court, you may recall, is a genteel estate of ivy-clad brick, with perfectly trimmed box hedges and roses in full riot. Nothing, I thought at first glance, could disturb its serene order. How wrong I was. The fete proceeded decorously until close to tea, when Lady Marjorie, radiant in lavender muslin, beckoned Poirot aside. He raised a curious eyebrow, a gesture I have learned always ports mischief, and followed her through a rose-scented arbor. Moments later, a shrill cry rent the afternoon air, and the assembled company turned as one to see her stagger back into view, her face ashen. I was at her side before you could say, "Crime most foul." Lady Marjorie's hand clutched a crumpled piece of lace, torn from a parasol I had noticed moments before, resting against her chaise longue. "My friend, my dear friend, has vanished," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "And this?" She shook the lace fragment. This was all she left behind. A hush fell. The parasol, I realized, had never belonged to Lady Marjorie. Its delicate handle of carved ivory and the embroidered motif of tiny lavender blossoms marked it as far too precious for the ordinary fete-goer. Yet there it lay, its canopy partially collapsed, its lacework scorched at one edge as though singed by a careless candle. "Who, madame?" Poirot inquired in his soft but insistent tone. He examined the lace respectfully, turning it over between his immaculate fingers. "My dear friend, Miss Eloise Gardiner," Lady Marjorie cried. "She was but moments ago at my side, chatting about the raffle prizes. And now she is gone." A murmur ran through the crowd. I caught glances exchanged among the guests. Mr. Burton, the portly banker, whose pince-nez glimmered in the afternoon light. Miss Penelope Winthrop, Lady Marjorie's niece, who paled and bit her lip. Colonel Ashford, whose military bearing seemed ill-suited to nervous glances. All paused, uncertain, as the late summer sun dipped behind the clouds. Poirot stood silent, his gaze drifting from the lace to each face in turn, as though seeking the hidden truth behind polite facades. And so, on that overcast July day, the game was afoot. Our challenge, set by a mere fragment of lace, and the disappearance of a woman whose secrets had turned a genteel fete into a household of shadows. Chapter 2. The first clues. Monsieur Poirot rose with deliberate calm and motioned for the assembled company to step back from the parasol. Lady Marjorie, pale and trembling, sank onto a nearby bench in the rose garden as I knelt to inspect the scene. The ivory handle lay half buried in the soft grass, its polished surface marred by a faint smear of something. Soil, I presumed, but possibly more sinister. Poirot's keen gaze flicked from the handle to the scorched lace fragment in Lady Marjorie's trembling hand. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his voice low but insistent. "The lace is torn with great precision, and the singe mark suggests a flame or heat source, yet there is no candle anywhere nearby. Curious, no?" I nodded, recalling that the garden had been illuminated only by daylight at the time of the disappearance. The only lamps stood beside the terrace, their brass lanterns cold and unused until the evening supper. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work. He repositioned the parasol handle and pressed lightly on its curvature. A faint imprint of footprints marred the loamy soil. A delicate shoe sole, I noted, perhaps belonging to a woman of slender build. He traced the shallow impressions with his finger, then abruptly stood and beckoned to me. "Walk with me, Hastings," he said, striding toward the wrought iron gate that led to the orchard. "Let us see whether the thief of lace departed in haste, or with measured stealth." We followed the narrow gravel path, passing beneath an arch of climbing roses still heavy with bloom. A single shoe lay forgotten near the lantern stand, a small dainty slipper of pale blue silk. I bent to lift it, imagining the discomfort that must have driven its owner to abandon it in flight. "Miss Gardiner's slipper, no doubt," I remarked. Poirot nodded gravely. "Indeed, mon ami. Yet how remarkable that she should remove her shoe while running. One would expect haste, but also discretion. Why cast off this emblem of elegance, unless one wished to mislead?" Before I could reply, Poirot's sharp ear caught a furtive rustle among the hedges. A figure emerged, a young maid, her apron damp with dew, her face flushed with fear. "Pardon me, sir," she stammered, addressing Poirot. I heard a scream and saw Miss Gardiner slip behind the mulberry hedge," she called out, "but then all was silent. I thought she might have fainted, so I ran to fetch help, and found only this." She held out a small ink pot, and the torn lace. Poirot took the battered glass pot and examined the dried ink caked around its rim. "The official stationery," he mused. "Yet the pot would not travel far without notice. Someone must have handled documents or letters nearby. And the ink, Hastings, is of a peculiar shade, Prussian blue, seldom used in private correspondences." I considered the implication. Someone may have altered a letter or seized papers before Miss Gardiner's disappearance, but which suspect would have motive to tamper with her correspondence? Poirot's gaze shifted upwards to the terrace, where several guests lingered at the windows, peering down the path. He pointed discreetly to one, Mr. Burton, the banker, whose expression betrayed both curiosity and alarm. "Notice, Hastings, the man's hands." Poirot glanced at Burton's gloved fingers, twitching as though agitated. "Such agitation suggests knowledge. Observe how his right hand twitches more, as though he has touched the parasol himself." I frowned, recalling that I had seen the banker holding the parasol only moments before Lady Marjorie's cry. Could Burton have arranged for Miss Gardiner's disappearance to conceal a financial motive? Before I could voice my speculation, Poirot turned to another figure. Colonel Ashford, standing apart from the others, his brows furrowed. The colonel's uniform bore a faint smudge of soil on the cuff, matching the earth on the parasol handle. "Note, Hastings," Poirot whispered, drawing my attention. "The colonel's cuff is soiled, yet his boots are pristine. He did not walk the garden path, yet his hand bears the mark of earth. Curious inconsistency." The maid, meanwhile, examined the lantern stand and pointed to a stain on the brass casing. Dried wax tinted the metal with a faint pink hue. I knelt beside it and touched the residue. It crumbled under my finger, releasing the faintest scent of lavender and smoke. "That fragrance is identical to Lady Marjorie's dress," I observed. "Identical to Lady Marjorie's dress," I observed, inhaling. Surely the candle was lit near her seat. But why scorch the lace? And why leave the parasol handle unattended? Poirot tapped his temple. "That, mon ami, is the question. The missing lady sought refuge behind the hedge, but did she intend to slip away unnoticed or under duress? And who among the party possessed both the opportunity and the motive?" He raised his head and surveyed the faces at the windows. Miss Penelope Winthrop appeared distraught, her delicate features contorted with worry. Meanwhile, Mrs. Faulkner, the novelist, stood poised at the top of the terrace stairs, pen and notepad in hand, as though ready to record every detail. "It seems we have more witnesses than suspects," Poirot remarked dryly. "Yet each witness also harbors a secret. We shall have our interviews, Hastings, but first let us mark these initial clues. The torn and singed lace, the Prussian blue ink pot, the abandoned slipper, and the mysterious wax stain." He placed the lace fragment gently into an envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into his coat pocket. I retrieved the ink pot and shoe, handing them to him in turn. He inspected each item with solemn reverence, as though they were relics of profound significance. "Our task," Poirot declared, "is to assemble the puzzle pieces and reveal the picture hidden beneath. These first clues are but the prologue, mon ami. The true mystery lies in the interactions yet to come." With that, he strode toward Lady Marjorie's bench, motioning for me to follow. The guests had begun to file past us in small clusters, their whispers drifting like smoke on the breeze. I knew then that our investigation had begun in earnest, and that every idle gesture and flurried emotion would soon assume the weight of evidence in the hands of Hercule Poirot. Thus concluded the first examination of the crime scene. The early inconsistencies were laid bare: a fragment of lace scarred by flame, a discreet ink pot, a single slipper, and an inexplicable wax stain. As we prepared to question each witness in turn, I felt the familiar stir of anticipation. For in the hands of Poirot, even the most trivial detail could unravel a web of deception more intricate than any mere trifle. Chapter 3. A Gathering of Suspects. Monsieur Poirot directed the remaining guests from the rose garden into the cool calm of the drawing-room, the mahogany doors swinging closed behind them with a measured click. I followed, noticing how each face betrayed a distinct shade of apprehension, some flickering with guilt, others with mere curiosity, but all now bound together by the shadow of Miss Gardiner's disappearance. Lady Marjorie Winthrop took her place on a fainting couch embroidered with pastel silks, smoothing the folds of her lavender muslin skirt. Her wide, startled eyes met mine briefly before darting away. At her right stood Miss Penelope Winthrop, the niece whose pale countenance I had observed trembling at the garden gate. Penelope's fingers toyed with a string of pearls at her throat, and I noted how her knuckles whitened at each anxious twist. "Thank you for assembling so promptly," Poirot began, his voice measured and courteous as he regarded the circle of suspects. "We find ourselves in unusual circumstances, n'est-ce pas? My friend Hastings and I shall require your full cooperation in answering questions regarding Miss Gardiner's abrupt departure and the curious evidence left behind." Mr. Burton, the portly banker with pince-nez perched precariously on his nose, swallowed audibly and straightened his tie. His labored breathing suggested nerves ill-suited to sudden drama. Beside him stood Colonel Ashford, his immaculate uniform unruffled despite the soil on his cuff, arms folded against his chest in a posture of rigid composure. His dark eyes flicked from Poirot to the silent window overlooking the rose garden, as though searching for a clandestine clue. At the back of the room hovered Mrs. Evelina Faulkner, the celebrated novelist, clutching a leather notebook and slender pencil. I guessed she intended to commit every detail to memory for her next mystery. And indeed, she afforded each guest a keen, analytical gaze that made one feel as if cross-examined even without speaking. Near her stood Dr. Emmeline Carr, the village physician, whose quiet demeanor and gentle gaze belied a resilience honed by years of treating both body and mind. Her crisp cotton dress and sensible shoes set her apart from the more flamboyant attendees. Poirot slowly raised a hand. "Let us begin with a simple account. Lady Marjorie, would you kindly describe the events immediately preceding Miss Gardiner's disappearance?" Lady Marjorie inhaled deeply, her throat moving as she steadied herself. "Eloise and I were discussing the raffle prizes, her favorite subject as you know, and she admired a parasol that Penelope had displayed earlier. She took it from Penelope's hands, examining the lace. Then she turned her back to the hedge, and she laughed at something I said. I looked away for only a moment to pour more tea, and when I turned back, she was gone." Miss Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. "I did offer her the parasol, Aunt Marjorie," she said in a trembling voice, "but she returned it to me. After that, I saw her glance toward the mulberry hedge, but I thought nothing of it. I assumed she would return to her seat." "Ah," Poirot interjected softly. "Assumptions can lead to misdirection. Thank you both." He turned a sympathetic gaze on Miss Penelope before moving on. "Mr. Burton, you handled the parasol briefly yourself. Can you recall anything unusual?" Mr. Burton's face flushed. I merely handed it to Miss Gardiner when she asked Monsieur. I noticed the lace was exquisite, but I paid little attention to the details. I was distracted by a business telegram I received that morning. Something urgent, you understand." He tapped the breast pocket of his waistcoat, as though the telegram still lay hidden there. "A business telegram," Poirot murmured. "Prussian blue ink, perhaps?" Burton blinked in surprise. "Why, yes, my forms use that exactly, but I don't see the relevance." Poirot simply inclined his head and moved on, filing this detail away. Colonel Ashford stepped forward next, his voice calm but clipped. "I was escorting Lady Marjorie earlier when I noticed Miss Gardiner slip away. I followed at a distance thinking she might need help crossing the grass. I found the parasol lying alone and the broken lace. She was not in the hedges, nor beyond the orchard gate. I returned to report to Madame Winthrop." He paused, as though awaiting praise for his civility. Instead, Poirot's eyes remained distant, appraising. "Thank you, Colonel. And yet your uniform cuff bears soil, while your boots remain unmarked by grass or earth. How is that possible?" The Colonel's jaw tightened imperceptibly before he bowed his head. "An oversight, perhaps," he murmured. Mrs. Faulkner was invited next. She perched at the edge of a settee, her notebook open on her lap. "I observed a curious interaction between Miss Gardiner and Dr. Carr about 10 minutes before the disappearance," she said, voice measured. "Dr. Carr handed Miss Gardiner a small vial from her medical bag, a remedy for her persistent migraines, I was told. The doctor left immediately and Miss Gardiner pocketed the vial. I believe it was this medicine, not the parasol, that held her attention." Dr. Carr adjusted her spectacles. "It is true I provided her medicine, but only after she complained of a splitting headache," the doctor explained. "I did not linger, for I was called to attend to a patient with a fever at the far end of the estate." She offered Poirot a steady gaze. "It was a routine request. I can show you the bottle and dosage later." "A headache, you say?" Poirot repeated, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "Headaches and lace parasols, an odd combination, yet perhaps not as odd as they first appear." Silence settled for a moment before I observed, "It seems every one of us had reason to see Miss Gardiner near the parasol. But who among us would wish her ill, or wish to conceal what she carried in her pocket?" Poirot's eyes glittered. "Excellent question, Hastings. We have motives of social ambition, romance, financial gain, and simple curiosity. But until we understand what Miss Gardner possessed, or feared to lose, we cannot discern the true culprit. He motioned toward the ornate sideboard. Tea had grown cold, and the silver tray bore only half-empty cups and a scattering of petits fours. "Let us retire for refreshments," he suggested. "But remain close. I shall question each of you privately. In the meantime, consider your actions and statements carefully. Any inconsistency may prove fatal to your alibi." As the guests dispersed toward tea and biscuits, I leaned toward Poirot. "You seem particularly interested in Mrs. Faulkner's observation of the vial and the telegram. Do you suspect a link?" Poirot smiled faintly, smoothing his mustache. "Everything is connected, Hastings. The painted parasol, the medical vial, the telegram, and the missing lady. We must allow the story to unfold without haste. The gathering of suspects is complete. Now begins the true work of separating fact from illusion." He straightened his jacket and exchanged a brief nod with Lady Marjorie, whose hands trembled as she dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I knew then that, with the suspects assembled and their motives established, the subtle architecture of deduction would soon reveal its first true triumphs, and that each of us would find our carefully constructed facades under Poirot's piercing scrutiny. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold of the drawing-room, his posture erect, and his little gray cells visibly spinning with purpose. He surveyed the assembled faces. Lady Marjorie's pale distress, Penelope's taut anxiety, Burton's uneasy shifting, Ashford's tight reserve, Faulkner's analytical scrutiny, and Dr. Carr's calm professionalism. For a moment, the room held its collective breath as Poirot allowed each countenance to imprint itself upon his memory. Once the attendees had settled in their respective positions, some on chaises longues, others perched on stiff-backed chairs, Poirot inclined his head with a courteous flourish. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice measured yet carrying the weight of authority, "I thank you for your patience. I have listened attentively to your accounts and examined the initial clues. It is now time to correct certain misconceptions about this affair." He paused, letting a ripple of expectation pass through the group. "The local constabulary believes Miss Gardner's disappearance to be a case of voluntary flight, distress caused by migraine perhaps, or an inconvenient love affair, but I emphatically disagree." A murmur of surprise traversed the room. Lady Marjorie gasped softly, and Penelope's hand flew to her throat. Mr. Burton's pince-nez slipped slightly down his nose, and Colonel Ashford straightened in apparent indignation. Mrs. Faulkner leaned forward, her pen poised over her notebook. Dr. Carr blinked, meeting Poirot's gaze with quiet curiosity. Poirot placed one gloved hand upon the mantelpiece, grounding himself in silent confidence. "Consider the evidence," he continued. "First, the torn and singed lace. If Miss Gardner had fled of her own volition, why take the time to handle a parasol at all? And why leave behind a fragment so deliberately severed? The scorch mark indicates proximity to flame, yet no candle was lit in the rose garden. Second, the Prussian blue ink pot found half hidden beneath the hedge. Why would a migraine sufferer carry ink into the garden? And why would she pause to open documents in the shadow of the mulberry? He lifted a slender finger, addressing the banker directly. "Mr. Burton, you received an urgent telegram that morning. You confess it was written in blue ink. Yet the message concerned a substantial loan to Miss Gardner's family estate. At least, that is what we are told." Is it not possible that you sought to suppress a financial disaster by ensuring her absence? Burton flushed crimson, stammering, Monsieur, I merely sought to assist. But Poirot did not wait for elaboration. Turning, Poirot addressed Colonel Ashford. And you, Colonel, claim to have followed Miss Gardiner discreetly, yet your boots bear no trace of dew or grass. Only your cuff shows soil. Are we to believe you approached behind the hedge, and then retraced your steps cleanly? The Colonel's jaw tightened, but he offered no response, his rigid demeanor betraying more than words ever could. Poirot then fixed his gaze on Penelope Winthrop. And you, Miss Penelope, offered your lace parasol as a token of affection. But you confess to hiding a letter from Miss Gardiner, an unsigned note of regret, perhaps, or an unspoken plea. Why plead without signature, and why at a moment when Miss Gardiner stood alone? Penelope's lips trembled. She swallowed but remained silent. A hush reigned as Poirot allowed the weight of his observations to settle. Then he smiled benignly. My friends, the official theory is but smoke and mirrors. Our dear Miss Gardiner did not wander off in confusion. She was taken, and by someone within this very circle. He turned to Dr. Carr, whose eyes reflected a spark of recognition. Doctor, you provided Miss Gardiner with her migraine remedy, a violet tincture, yet the bottle's label is missing. You claim it was routine, but without a label, one cannot be sure of its contents. Might the tincture have been altered? Dr. Carr's composure faltered for a fraction, her breath catching as she replied, Monsieur, I assure you it was purely medicinal. Poirot inclined his head, letting the silence stretch. We shall see. He strode to a small side table and retrieved the torn lace fragment sealed in its envelope. Holding it aloft, he said, This lace is not merely decorative. It conceals a faint perfume of bergamot and tobacco. Miss Gardiner was not the only one who carried such a scent. I detected it on the cuff of Colonel Ashford and in the pages of Mr. Burton's telegram. Coincidence? I think not. A collective gasp rose from the company. The Colonel sputtered, Those are my cologne and my afternoon habit. But Poirot held up his hand. The scent is intimate, mon ami. Were these two scents layered, one upon the other, upon a single fragment of lace? We have both finance and military ambition entwined. Yet the lace belongs to neither. He replaced the fragment and faced the group squarely. By sundown I shall have determined which of you wields both the means and the motive. Until then I insist that no one leaves this room unattended. All communication devices, telegraphs, telephones, will be under my supervision. Lady Marjorie's relief became evident as she nodded, clutching her handkerchief. Penelope trembled, but straightened, steeling herself. Burton paled, and Ashford's shoulders sagged. Mrs. Faulkner tapped her pencil impatiently, eager to record every syllable, while Dr. Carr smoothed her skirt, her face a mask of professional concern. Poirot concluded, We have taken our first steps. We have dismissed the official theory and set aside misdirection. Now we embark on a proper investigation, guided by logic, psychology, and the subtle truth that lies beneath every gesture. He turned to me, beckoning softly. Hastings, prepare yourself. I shall require your assistance in interviewing each suspect in turn. And, mon ami, keep your eyes and your heart open. For in matters of the little gray cells, emotion is but another clue. With that, Poirot swept from the room, leaving an assembly of shaken but intrigued guests. I followed, heart pounding with anticipation. The detective had declared war upon illusion. It remained only to see which suspect would crack under the pressure and reveal the truth that had so skillfully been concealed behind lace and shadows. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Begin. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the drawing room as Poirot and I settled at a small rosewood table near the fireplace. The guests had been instructed to remain within earshot, but not to overhear, to ensure both privacy and discretion. A servant stood discreetly by the door with a tray of coffee and petit fours, ready at a moment's notice. Poirot's expression was one of intense concentration, his little gray cells already arranging the pieces of this intricate puzzle. "Mon ami," he whispered, "we begin with Mr. Burton. His financial entanglements may yet conceal something more than a mere loan." He tapped a silver bell. In moments, Burton entered, his gait uneasy, his brow drawn. Poirot smiled with polished courtesy. "Monsieur Burton, I thank you for your prompt arrival. Please, be seated." Burton perched on a chair opposite Poirot, shifting as though each movement risked disclosure. "Sir," Burton began, voice tremulous, "I assure you, I wish only to assist in any way I can." He paused, glancing warily at the envelope on the table containing the lace fragment. "Let us speak then of the telegram you received this morning," Poirot said, folding his hands. "You described it as urgent. May I ask its precise contents?" Burton's lips quivered. It concerned a substantial shortfall in the estate accounts of a friend. Miss Gardiner's family, in fact. I feared ruin for them. His voice cracked with earnest regret. I wrote to persuade her to secure funds before disaster struck. And yet you did not deliver the letter yourself. Poirot's brow rose. It was impossible. I am, as you know, engaged to the bank's board meeting this afternoon in London. Burton's hand twitched toward his waistcoat pocket. I entrusted the telegram to my clerk. He stopped, as though re-evaluating his words. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "But the ink here," he tapped the envelope, "carries your very shade of Prussian blue." Burton gasped. "I had occasion to inspect the lace myself, to confirm its authenticity before handing it to Miss Gardiner. I may have touched it more firmly than intended." He trailed off. Poirot inclined his head. "A plausible explanation. But tell me, monsieur, did you witness Miss Gardiner handling any papers near the hedge?" Burton closed his eyes. "No, monsieur, but I did see her slip something small into her muff as she moved." Burton's eyes flicked upward. "I assumed it was her remedies or perhaps a love letter." He swallowed. "I did not believe it of any consequence. Until now." Poirot nodded. "Merci. You may go." Burton rose, relief mingled with lingering anxiety in his eyes. He bowed and left, leaving Poirot to make a few quick notes on a small pad. "That," Poirot observed, "confirms he touched the lace and saw Miss Gardiner conceal an item. Yet he claims ignorance of its nature. Suspicious, but incomplete." Next, the Colonel. Within minutes, Colonel Ashford strode in, military bearing intact though his shoulders bore a trace of tension. He nodded sharply to Poirot and took the remaining seat. "Colonel, you followed Miss Gardiner through the garden, yes?" Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. "I did, monsieur," Ashford replied. "I wished to ensure her safety. It was unwise for a lady to wander unsupervised near tall hedges." His voice held a note of chivalry. "And yet, your boots bear no grass stains." Poirot tapped the Colonel's cuff. "But your sleeve carries soil, perhaps from the parasol handle." Ashford paused, jaw clenched. "It may have brushed against the earth when I retrieved the handle," he said. "I did not wish to alarm anyone with muddy boots." so I wiped them clean before returning to Lady Marjorie's side. Poirot's moustache twitched. A commendable courtesy. But you also wore a familiar scent of bergamot and tobacco which I detected on the lace. Does not your own fragrance echo yours? The Colonel's eyes narrowed. My choice of cologne is personal, he began. Indeed. Yet the lace bears the very blend. Poirot interrupted softly. You argue you did not handle it, but one soil mark and one aroma cannot be mere coincidence. Ashford's shoulders sagged in defeat. Monsieur, I admit I brushed the lace aside when I found it. I wished to observe more without being seen, but I returned it to the hedge immediately, believing Miss Gardiner might need it later. He struggled for composure. I sought no harm. Your explanation may suffice, Colonel, but know this. Every gesture will be examined. Poirot gave a slight nod, and Ashford exited, leaving a faint odor of tobacco behind. He is truthful, but misguided, Poirot murmured. His honor compels him to assist, yet he fails to realize how suspicion arises from such inconsistencies. Now, Hastings, you shall observe closely as I question Miss Penelope. Miss Penelope entered, her posture tentative. She offered a small curtsy before seating herself, fidgeting with the pearls around her throat. Miss Penelope, Poirot began kindly, you graciously offered your parasol to Miss Gardiner earlier. Yet you admit to hiding a letter intended for her. Might you explain why? Penelope's voice wavered. It was not meant to distress her, monsieur. I found the note slipped under my door, unsigned, but clearly from someone seeking forgiveness. I feared it was from my cousin, and that Eloise would be too hurt or angry to speak to me. She sighed. I wanted to spare her embarrassment. And what did the letter contain? Poirot asked. Penelope's cheeks flushed. Words of regret and unrequited feelings, I believe. I did not read it thoroughly. I hoped it was nothing more than a simple apology. She paused. I did not intend to interfere. She was examining the lace when I tried to retrieve it. Poirot tapped his chin. So, you approached her, unaware she might feel threatened by the note. He leaned forward, eyes sympathetic. Yet you did not see her slip behind the hedge, only that she left the parasol? Penelope nodded, tears forming. Yes, I thought she sought privacy to read the note. I had no notion of danger. She dabbed at her eyes. I never meant for anything to happen. Merci, mademoiselle. Poirot's tone was gentle. Your actions stem from concern, not malice. But the letter may hold the key to motive, yours or another's. We shall retrieve it and examine its origins. Penelope stood and curtsied once more before departing. Compassionate interference, Poirot observed. Her motive was protective, yet her actions allowed opportunity for someone else to exploit. Now, Hastings, you and I shall question Mrs. Faulkner and Dr. Carr in turn. He glanced at the small notebook on the table. Mrs. Faulkner entered promptly, her expression analytical. She perched on the edge of the chair and opened her notebook with a decisive flick. Madame, you noted I asked about a vial of tincture Miss Gardiner carried. Poirot began. What did you observe? Faulkner tapped her pencil. She drank only half the dose and placed the vial back in her muff. It was of unusual manufacture, brown glass with no label. When I asked, she said it was a remedy for migraines, but she did not recall the maker's name. She looked up. I thought it curious that her doctor would dispense medicine without proper labeling. Indeed, Poirot murmured. Did you notice any ill effects after she consumed it? None. She appeared no worse for wear until she vanished. Faulkner's eyes gleamed with curiosity. But later I detected the faint scent of lavender and smoke, likely from the parasol, clinging to the vial. Poirot made a brief note. "Thank you, madam." She bowed and withdrew. Finally, Dr. Emmeline Carr entered, composed, yet alert. She smiled politely and took the last vacant seat. "Doctor, kindly explain your actions with the migraine tincture," Poirot said. "Why was the bottle unlabeled?" Dr. Carr's lips curved in a professional smile. "I carry a standard tincture made in the village apothecary. It is always the same blend: violet essence, a touch of digitalis, and mild sedative. I label only the bottles in my dispensary. For field use I rely on memory and handwriting." She hesitated. "I realize now that may seem careless." "And did you witness anyone tampering with the medicine?" Poirot asked. The eyes clouded. "Number." "But when I returned to collect the empty vial, it was gone. I found only a faint smudge of violet on the grass near the hedge." She closed her eyes briefly. "I fear someone meant to use it for more sinister purposes." Poirot nodded gravely. "Merci, doctor. Your professionalism is beyond reproach, yet the missing vial suggests the murderer, or the missing woman, took it. We shall recover it soon." He rose, gathering his notes. "Excellent work, Hastings. These interviews clarify motive, opportunity, and method. We have financial pressure, protective interference, military courtesy, literary curiosity, and medical trust, all entwined around Miss Gardner's disappearance." He looked toward the door. "Now, Hastings, let us reconvene with Lady Marjorie and retrieve the hidden letter. The game proceeds apace, and soon a second false lead will claim attention. But for now, we have the first layer of confession and contradiction, patiently uncovered by our little gray cells." With a nod, Poirot and I stepped from the private chamber back into the corridor, ready for the next phase of investigation under the waning light of an anxious summer's day. Chapter 6. First False Lead. The evening air had cooled by the time Poirot and I reconvened in the rose garden, lanterns flickering gently along the gravel paths. A hush lay over Styles Court as the household settled into uneasy anticipation. Rumors of Miss Gardner's fate now whispered in every corridor. Poirot moved with deliberate grace, beckoning me to his side as we approached the hedged alcove, where the first clues had surfaced. "Mon ami," he murmured. "It is time to examine a promising lead. A red herring, perhaps, but one that the authorities have seized upon with undue enthusiasm." We found Constable MacLeod already at the hedge, crouching beside a small wooden box. The uniformed man straightened, offering a nervous salute. "Monsieur Poirot, sir, we've recovered this parcel from the mulberry hedge. It was concealed in a hollow recess. We believed it might belong to Miss Gardner." Poirot accepted the package with careful fingers. Its wrapping was plain brown paper, tied with coarse twine. He examined the seal, the monogram E.G. scrawled in hurried ink. He turned it over, noting the slight bulge within. "And what theory have the good constables spun around this discovery?" MacLeod cleared his throat. "They believe Miss Gardner sent it to herself, to suggest a voluntary departure. Perhaps she staged her own vanishing, monsieur." I watched as Poirot's face contracted into a wry smile. He untied the twine and peeled back the paper. Inside lay a small leather-bound diary, its cover stamped in gilt with the initials E.G. Poirot opened it to the first page, flicking past neat entries in a feminine hand, notes about migraines, social engagements, and a few terse lines about familial expectations. He paused at an entry dated the morning of her disappearance. July 14th, 4 p.m. The parasol brings back memories of happier times. Penelope's gift is bittersweet. Mother's disapproval still lingers. Poirot closed the diary and held it aloft. Do you note, Hastings, the handwriting is deliberate and careful, hardly the scrawl one would use in haste. And the timestamp within indicates she wrote this after the Parasol episode. MacLeod shifted uncomfortably. Yes, monsieur. But it could still support the idea that she intended to leave, perhaps to escape family pressures. Poirot smiled thinly. Perhaps. Yet why deposit this at the hedge, rather than carry it with her? And why mark it with her initials so boldly? The cunning criminal would avoid obvious signatures. He tapped the leather cover. Furthermore, the diary entries end abruptly at this page. The remaining leaves are blank, as though torn out. I peered at the edges and saw a clean, straight cut. A missing portion, then. Someone removed the concluding pages. Indeed, Poirot agreed. But who benefits from concealing those final words? And why place this here to mislead? The constable's shoulders slumped. The inspector thought it significant, too significant to ignore. He has brought half the village to search for more entries. He swallowed. I'm sorry, monsieur, if it proves irrelevant. Poirot handed the diary back and bent to examine the hedge more closely. We must not dismiss it outright, but neither must we glorify it. A false lead can be more treacherous than no lead at all. He rose and turned toward the lantern-lit path. As Poirot and I walked back toward the main house, he whispered, The authorities will chase after this diary and waste precious hours. Meanwhile, the true culprit moves freely. He looked up at the darkening sky. Let us allow them their diversion. In the meantime, I shall confront one more suspect with these findings. We entered the library, where Lady Marjorie sat at a writing desk, her lavender dress now dim in the candlelight. She looked up at our approach, hope and anxiety mingling in her eyes. Lady Marjorie, Poirot began, voice gentle. The constables have found a diary bearing Miss Gardner's initials. Do you recognize it? Lady Marjorie rose, smoothing her skirts. She moved to the desk and took the volume from Poirot's outstretched hand. Yes, she whispered, tracing the gilt letters. It is Eloise's personal journal. She always wrote here in private. She opened it, eyes scanning the pages. But these last pages, they are missing. Eloise would never tear out her own words. Someone has removed them. Poirot inclined his head and placed this volume at the hedge, marked for all to see. An ingenious ploy to suggest voluntary flight. Yet the missing pages speak of something deeper, something someone feared being recorded. Lady Marjorie's lips trembled. She confided in me once about an engagement broken off and a debt owed by her family, but she would not have taken her own life. She loved life too much. Certainly, madame, Poirot agreed, but someone else may have sought to silence her revelations. We must discover to whom those pages pointed. He straightened and turned to me. Hastings, see that the diary is secured. I shall speak to the inspector. Allow him his triumph. Meanwhile, fetch Miss Penelope. She may recall referencing her cousin's journal. I exited, to find Penelope in the conservatory, gazing at a night-blooming orchid. She startled as I approached, concern evident in her eyes. Miss Penelope, I said quietly, Poirot wishes to speak with you regarding your cousin's diary. She nodded, tears glinting. Moments later, the three of us returned to the library. Poirot seated Penelope beside Lady Marjorie, diary open on the desk. Mademoiselle, Poirot asked gently, did Eloise ever mention to you the contents of the last entries? perhaps speaking aloud what she wrote. Penelope hesitated, glancing between Poirot and her aunt. She swallowed. She spoke of a confession she intended to make, something that would shock Mother. She said it here, but she was too afraid to tell me exactly. Did she specify what form that confession would take? Poirot pressed. Penelope closed her eyes. She hinted at an old family will, a clause that disinherited her if she went against her father's wishes. She planned to disclose this to Mother privately, but she never did. Her voice faltered. She feared it would divide the family. Poirot nodded slowly. So the missing pages likely contained the details of that clause. Someone with knowledge of the will had motive to ensure those words stayed buried. He held the diary aloft. This false lead may satisfy the inspector, but it will not deceive us. We now know that Eloise's hidden inheritance is central to the motive. I suspect the culprit used this diary to divert attention while they removed the true evidence elsewhere. Lady Marjorie's hands clenched. But who would do that? Who stands to gain from hiding Eloise's inheritance clause? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. The answer lies among those who feared loss, either of wealth or reputation. We shall investigate further at dawn. For now, Hastings, let the inspector imagine himself a success. Tomorrow we shall unravel the genuine thread of this mystery. He closed the diary and replaced it in Lady Marjorie's hands. As we departed the library, I heard Poirot murmur, "Even the cleverest misdirection can only delay the inevitable. The little gray cells will not be fooled for long." And so, as the household slept uneasily, Poirot allowed the first false lead to occupy the authorities, reserving his full brilliance for the truth that lay hidden beneath layers of deceit. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. By the following morning, a subdued tension had settled over Styles Court. The false lead of the diary had occupied the local constables, but to Monsieur Poirot it was merely a diversion. At 10 o'clock, he summoned the principal suspects to the oak-paneled drawing-room, its windows open to a breeze scented faintly with rose and early dew. The servants discreetly withdrew, leaving 6 pairs of anxious eyes fixed upon the petite Belgian detective. Poirot took his place at the head of a semicircle formed by Lady Marjorie, Miss Penelope, Mr. Burton, Colonel Ashford, Mrs. Faulkner, and Dr. Carretera. He folded his hands upon his waistcoat and allowed silence to stretch, observing each face in turn before speaking. "My friends," he began, voice soft yet incisive, "we have heard your accounts and examined the physical evidence. But to penetrate the heart of deception, one must turn to the battlefield of the mind. Today, I engage you in what you might call a psychological game, one in which your reactions will betray more than words." He advanced a step, eyes locked on Mr. Burton. "Let us consider a scenario. Suppose a banker fears financial ruin and chooses to eliminate the debtor rather than risk scandal. He conceals evidence in a garden, then uses telegram ink to mark the scene, confident no one will suspect his own signature." Burton's face paled. He shifted in his chair. Poirot turned to Miss Penelope, his gaze unwavering. "Or imagine a niece, torn between loyalty and ambition, poisons her cousin's remedies to ensure an inheritance remains within the family. She might frame another by removing pages from a diary, then hide behind the guise of compassion." Penelope's breath caught, and she pressed a hand to her lips. Next, Poirot addressed Colonel Ashford, stepping closer. "Perhaps a military man, disciplined and proud, uses his knowledge of tactics to trap the unwary. He soothes his conscience by claiming courtesy, yet soil on his cuff might reveal where the true battle was fought. The colonel's jaw stiffened. He lifted his chin in measured defiance. Poirot smiled benevolently before moving to Mrs. Faulkner, or a novelist, keen on crafting a sensational plot, who cannot resist shaping real events to her pen's design. She plants clues with the flair of fiction, confident that emotion will obscure logic. Mrs. Faulkner's eyes flashed with both affront and interest, her pencil tapping impatiently. Finally Poirot turned to Dr. Carr, voice gentle. "And you, dear doctor, whose trust is beyond reproach. You carry a tincture of sedative delight, yet a missing label and a vanished bottle hint at something darker than migraine relief." Dr. Carr's serene facade flickered. Her lips parted as though to speak, then closed. Poirot held up a slender finger. "These are but suppositions, yet each contains a kernel of truth about one of you. Notice your reactions. Fear, guilt, defiance, fascination, hesitation. Each emotion is an unguarded confession." He paused, scanning their faces again. A tense quiet ensued until Lady Marjorie, seated nearest the mantel, spoke softly. "Monsieur Poirot, these scenarios are artful, but surely they could apply to any of us." Her eyes shone with worry. "Surely you have something more concrete." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, concrete evidence will come in due course. But first, I must narrow the field. Observe closely." He retrieved from his pocket the lace fragment. This lace carried the perfume of bergamot and tobacco. I suggested two suspects by implication of scent, yet the true perfume bore a faint undertone of rose. He placed the lace on the table and pointed to Penelope's brooch, a tiny carved rose of mother of pearl. Penelope's face flushed crimson as she touched the brooch. "But it was my gift from Eloise," she whispered. "I wore it only today." "And yet," Poirot pressed gently, "you wore the brooch yesterday at the garden fete. The rose scent clings to you as to the lace. A deliberate transfer or innocent coincidence?" He allowed the question to hover. Penelope lowered her gaze. I only wore the brooch when she refused to keep it. I wanted her to remember me fondly." A voice trembled. "I never harmed her." Poirot smiled calmly. "Your motive is affectionate. Yet sentiment can blind us to opportunity. Keep that in mind." He turned then to Colonel Ashford. "Colonel, yesterday evening you lit a single cigarette in the garden after all had gone indoors. You stifled the flame beneath a rose branch to avoid detection. The smoke drifted through the hedge. That might account for the singe on the lace." The colonel's eyes widened. His hand unconsciously lifted to the boutonniere on his lapel, where a single rose bloom was pinned. "The same rose, yes," Poirot continued, "but you claim to have cleaned your boots before rejoining Lady Marjorie. Yet no trace of earth remained on your soles. You wore overshoes, deliberately concealing tracks perhaps." Ashford stiffened, knowing Poirot's little grey cells had trapped him in his own courtesy. Before the colonel could speak, Mrs. Faulkner interjected. "Monsieur, if I may, your psychological games provide dramatic flourish. But let us return to the matter of the diary's missing pages. Might be disposed." She tapped her notebook. "I've arranged for a thorough sweep of the servants' quarters and bins." Poirot regarded her with a gleam of respect. "Madame, your literary mind seeks resolution through elimination. Admirable. Yet the culprit is unlikely to dispose of the pages in an obvious place. They would understand the power of misdirection." He paused, then addressed Dr. Carr with a kindly tone. "Doctor, you suggested the tincture was altered. Pray, describe the effect you would expect from a sedative combined with digitalis, slow pulse, dizziness, confusion? Did Miss Gardner exhibit any symptoms before vanishing? Dr. Carr's brows furrowed as she recalled. She complained of nausea, then a sudden crippling malaise. She said the air felt thick, and the parasol felt heavy in her hand. She shivered at the memory. But she recovered quickly when I administered more remedy. It was almost too quick. Poirot nodded. A rapid recovery suggests an antidote or a delay in onset. Someone anticipated her reaction, a dual mixture perhaps, designed to disable and then restore. He tapped the lace fragment again. The scorch mark may indicate a heated vial used to volatilize a substance onto the lace itself. A collective murmur rose among the suspects. Burton's shoulders hunched as he imagined his beloved telegram forms used for poison. Penelope closed her eyes, shuddering at the thought of her gift weaponized. The colonel's clenched fists hinted at suppressed rage, while Mrs. Faulkner's swift notes betrayed a novelist's intrigue. Dr. Carr's face tightened, betraying professional dread. Poirot allowed the atmosphere to thicken, then spoke softly. The seeds of guilt have been sown. Each of you carries a motive, each has had opportunity, and each bears some mark upon your conscience. The true culprit will soon find these psychological pressures unbearable. Our next step will test your resolve further. He dismissed them with a courteous nod. As the suspects left the room, each wore a small tremor in their step. Fear, guilt, or fascination unmasked. Poirot turned to me, a triumphant sparkle in his eye. Mon ami, he said quietly, the psychological game is a most potent tool. We have observed reactions, revealed contradictions, and ignited doubt in the guilty mind. Soon, one of these noble personages will slip, unable to withstand the tension of their own invention. I nodded, fascinated. In the hush of the drawing room, as sunlight waned and shadows deepened, I knew that Poirot's mind had set the trap. Now it remained only to wait and watch which suspect would fall prey to the little gray cell's exquisite design. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Late morning sunshine filtered through the tall library windows as Poirot and I returned to the heart of Styles Court, prepared for the next stage of our investigation. The hush that greeted us spoke of mounting tension, a silent prelude to the unfolding drama. We found Lady Marjorie and Miss Penelope seated together over tea, their faces drawn, while Mrs. Faulkner hovered at a card table strewn with papers. Colonel Ashford and Mr. Burton lingered near the hearth, exchanging low words. Dr. Carr stood by the bookcases, her expression grave. Poirot raised a gloved hand in greeting and motioned for them to assemble in the center of the room. Each obeyed, forming a circle of uneasy anticipation. Poirot's dark eyes shone with the thrill of discovery. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "it appears that while our attention has been fixed upon one mystery, another has sprung to life, one that may illuminate further the secrets of this household." He held aloft a small envelope. This was discovered in the billiard room, tucked beneath the green baize of the table, an unsigned note reading simply, "The will lies in the quarters of the heart. Seek where shadows fall at noon." A murmur rippled through the group. Lady Marjorie reached forward, trembling, to take the envelope. She unfolded the paper, pale eyes scanning the cryptic lines. "The quarters of the heart, shadows at noon." She repeated, her voice quavering. What could it mean? Poirot beckoned to Mrs. Faulkner. "Madame, you have already begun examining this clue." The novelist nodded, her pencil tapping thoughtfully against her notepad. "Yes," Mrs. Faulkner said, "I found traces of violet ink matching that of the diary entries and a faint imprint of a key on the reverse side." No signature, but the handwriting resembles Miss Gardner's. She looked up, curiosity alight. Perhaps this message was penned by her before she vanished. Poirot inclined his head. An intriguing hypothesis, yet if Miss Gardner left a clue to the location of a will, an incriminating clause, why hide it in the billiard room? And why, at midday, when shadows are shortest? He tapped his temple. These riddles serve to delay us, but they also point toward the culprit's mind. He turned to Colonel Ashford. Colonel, did you frequent the billiard room yesterday? The colonel straightened. I passed through on my way to speak with Lady Marjorie about dinner arrangements, he replied. I noticed nothing unusual, save a whisper of rose scent in the air. He glanced at Penelope's brooch. As always. Poirot's lips curved slightly. And yet you brought your cigarette with you, n'est-ce pas? The smell of tobacco lingers still. He waved a hand, dispersing the colonel's denial like mist. The colonel flushed, but said nothing more. Next, Poirot addressed Mr. Burton. Monsieur, your clerk reported that a key was missing from your office this morning. A skeleton key, capable of opening many doors. Might the culprit have borrowed it? Burton swallowed heavily. I keep a key chain for odd jobs around the estate, he stammered. But I did not notice any were missing until just after this note was found. He ran a shaky hand through his hair. If someone has taken it, they could have hidden the will anywhere, though I thought all our legal papers were secure. Poirot nodded. Indeed, but now we have a riddle. Quarters of the heart. Let us think metaphorically. Where does one symbolically store secrets of the heart? In a diary, in a portrait, in a lockbox concealed behind a fireplace. He paused, eyes raking the room. Miss Penelope shifted. A portrait, she said softly. The family gallery down the corridor. There is a painting of my late father, his coat pocket stitched slightly open in the image. She raised her chin. I recalled Mother mentioning that pocket symbolized his hidden aspirations. Poirot's face brightened. Excellent, mademoiselle. The quarters of the heart, indeed. He turned to Lady Marjorie. Madame, may I have the honor of inspecting the gallery? Lady Marjorie inclined her head, leading the way. We followed through an arched doorway into a corridor lined with ancestral portraits. At the far end, the large oil painting of Mr. Winthrop caught the afternoon light. Poirot stepped forward, advancing to the image. He studied the painted pocket, then reached gently toward the frame. Allow me, he murmured, pressing on the carved embellishment just above the subject's heart. A faint click sounded, and a hidden panel swung open to reveal a small compartment. Inside lay a folded sheet of parchment, the missing will clause, penned in Eloise Gardner's delicate hand. A provision that, should Lady Marjorie remarry, Eloise would inherit the entire estate. Beneath it rested a heavy iron key. Poirot extracted both and held them aloft triumphantly. Voila! The will has been preserved and the key returned to its maker's hiding place. We now know the motive. To prevent Eloise from enforcing her inheritance, someone sought to eradicate this clause from existence. Lady Marjorie's hands shook as she took the parchment. This proves Eloise intended to protect me, yet also claims her stake. But who would remove it? She looked toward Penelope, concern mingling with hurt in her eyes. Miss Penelope stepped forward, tears glistening. I spoke with Eloise last evening, she said softly. She feared the clause would drive Mother back to Papa's memory, binding her heart to past regrets instead of future happiness. She planned to leave it hidden until we could discuss it calmly. Poirot's gaze swept across the assembled. The clue in the billiard room was designed to draw attention to this very parchment. But someone else found it first and hid it back, leaving only enough to misdirect. Now the question is, who among you knew of the clause and had the means to move it and the will to conceal it? He lowered the parchment and turned to Mrs. Faulkner. Madame, you, as an observer of human drama, must agree this author of this riddle was steeped in poetic misdirection. Mrs. Faulkner nodded, cheeks flushed. Yes, she said. But I confess I detected the violet ink and the key imprint, tricks worthy of a clever hand, Eloise's hand or another's. She tapped her notebook. Either she planned this for her own disappearance, or someone used her style against her. Poirot smiled. Precisely. The second mystery reinforces the first. Our missing lady carried two powerful items, her diary and her buried clothes. Both were used to mislead. We have now recovered the clothes, but the remaining pages of her diary and Miss Gardiner herself are still absent. He folded the parchment and handed it to Lady Marjorie. We shall secure this safely. Next, we must recover those diary pages and discover who tampered with both records. At that moment, Dr. Carr entered hastily, breathless. Monsieur Poirot, I must speak with you. Something has happened in the infirmary. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. Poirot's brow arched in anticipation. Lead the way, doctor. He motioned for the group to follow. As we departed the gallery, I glanced at Poirot. Another twist, perhaps, I whispered. He gave a slight smile. Indeed, Hastings. The secondary mystery has revealed the culprit's boldness. Now we shall witness their desperation and perhaps unmask them at last. With that, we hurried down the corridor, the recovered clothes burning a hole in our hopes, and the promise of a new revelation guiding our steps into the unknown. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. We followed Dr. Carr through a narrow corridor to the infirmary, where the lamplight glowed softly against whitewashed walls. Inside, Nurse Simmons knelt by a small bedside, her face pale and drawn. Upon the cot lay Miss Eloise Gardiner, propped against pillows, her eyes closed, but breathing steadily. A faint bruise marred her temple, and the discarded lace fragment lay on the floor beside the bed. Poirot entered with unhurried dignity, surveying the scene. Nurse Simmons, he said gently. You fainted after aiding Miss Gardiner. The nurse nodded, tears brimming. I found her there when I came to check on her. She was unconscious and clutching this. He lifted the lace, yet she could not speak. I tried to revive her, and then I lost consciousness. Dr. Carr knelt beside the nurse. She is all right now, thanks to your care, nurse, the doctor reassured her. But tell me, what did Miss Gardiner say before she lapsed? Nurse Simmons swallowed. She whispered a name. Ashford. That is all I could make out. A hush fell. Colonel Ashford's shoulders stiffened, his face betraying no relief. Poirot's eyes glinted. Interesting. Now, Hastings, let us consider what we know of relationships in this household. We left the infirmary in thoughtful silence. In the rose garden, Poirot paused beneath an arbor of pink blooms and began to speak in his soft, precise voice. Mon ami, the key to unraveling this mystery lies not only in objects or statements, but in the hidden ties among these people. He lifted his finger. Observe how the nurse's whisper implicates Colonel Ashford, whether truth or misdirection. Perhaps she recognized his scent, or merely uttered a name familiar to her. I nodded. But how does that help us understand the true culprit? Poirot smiled. By mapping each connection, we will see who benefits most from Miss Gardner's disappearance, and who had the access to harm her. He gestured to the pathway. Let us begin with the Colonel himself. We strolled past manicured hedges toward the terrace, where Colonel Ashford stood alone, staring at the empty chairs from yesterday's fete. Poirot addressed him crisply. Colonel, Nurse Simmons named you before she fainted. Was she mistaken, or did you visit this infirmary after the, I regret to say, assault? Ashford